Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
All right. Hello and welcome to yet another All Things Policy episode. And today we have Aditi Mutatkar, who's an international badminton player, and she is one among the four who has won the national championship across age groups. And she's also a Commonwealth silver medalist. Incidentally, she's also done her master's in public affairs and specialized in nonprofit management. And she's currently with Simply Sports Foundation, where she heads the athletes and the women initiatives there. And of course, the bragging rights is that she's our alum as well from Takshashila. Welcome to this All Things Policy, Aditi.
Hi, Sowmya. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I have been wanting to be here for some time, and I'm really looking forward to our chat today.
Yes, we've had the opportunity to discuss about women in sports at Pune alumni meetup, but we thought it was worthy enough to get onto an All Things Policy podcast. And like Aditi said, it's been on the wait for a while. And then we said before December, we should close this, right? So happy to have you. And to get started, Aditi, I think when we just reflect about sports or even games or anything to do with physical fitness, the moment one closes their eyes to just think about it, it's fairly simple. You think about a playground, your friends, and a lot of noise and happiness, and of course it's part of our daily lives kind of thing, right? It didn't look, at least the time I was growing up, that it's a privilege of sorts. But what's the sports scene overall if you look at age groups today and if you look at physical activity? Do you think that there is something missing, or do you feel that some states are doing better and you feel like, this is the way others should replicate it? What are your initial thoughts about it?
Yeah, so I think in terms of, if we just break it down in terms of age groups, in terms of teenagers or, young children, right? You see that there is not as many girls on the ground. And I always give this example that when you go to, say, a Shivaji Park in Dadar, everybody knows about Shivaji Park in Bombay. It's like, one of the central kind of monumental spaces in Bombay. And when you go there and you look at the ground there, you see that there is just not a girl playing cricket, not a girl throwing a ball, not a girl running around with the guys. And it's just like, a very special moment if you see two girls on that ground. Otherwise it's just kind of taken over by men or boys playing cricket or, doing their things. So, and this is in the city, right? And again, when we, of course, when it comes to cities and schools, there's a different scenario because you generally have PT period going on in most of these schools. So there is at least some access to girls in the cities to kind of, at least pick up a ball, do something in terms of an organized activity. But again, if you go a little bit towards the interiors of India and look at what is happening in schools overall, in the country. And I was working in the physical education space as well for some time. And I have seen firsthand that when you go on a playground, even in schools, in government schools, there is lack of equipment. That is one thing. But also the other thing is that, it's again very, very boys dominated. The grounds are still very boys dominated. There are problems with uniforms in some places that, girls are not comfortable running around in the uniforms and, or it's just that you see girls sitting under a tree and chatting when the guys are just playing football and running around with a ball. So you see these kind of various, scenarios when it comes to young children. Also, I think one of the key things that also seems to be missed, that there is two kinds of play, right? There is the free play where you, like what you said, like you just have a ground nearby or you have a ground in your society, you're going and playing with the kids and, you're having fun with them. But then there is also the organized part of play, right? What I mean by organized part is, for example, I met a girl, very young girl, when I was coaching in Pune, and she came and told me, I was trying to do some kind of hand-eye coordination activity with her and I threw a ball at her and she just couldn't catch. And she was, I think, around 10, 11 years of age. Okay. And she was not able to catch the ball. So I kept trying. And then she was like, ma'am, I'm sorry, but nobody has even taught me how to catch a ball yet, And she was from from a city background and all of that. So these essential things like just running properly, or catching a ball or throwing a ball, understanding speed, direction. All of this needs a little bit of an organized framework, right? When do you teach what to a kid in terms of physical activity, and how do you kind of just build them up? And this is not really about professional sport at all. It's just about growing, as healthy children and all of that. So you see all of these patterns going around, and it is. I mean, there was a study which our report also talks about by ICMR, and it says that only 3%. It's about the women now, but it's 3% women that are physically active or can be deemed physically active in the country, and or at least are in that scale that you can call them fit. Most of them actually don't match up, and this is a study done by ICMR. That becomes the part of the woman, as you go on the older scale of things. And again, it's very apparent, right? When it even comes to women and them playing on the ground, you see the men, you see the men playing a football match, or you see your husband going and playing, and all of that. But somehow that space is still not welcome for a woman, right? And I have hardly seen my mother, for example. My mother was a PT teacher all her life. She was also a very successful athlete at her level, at the level that she played in school, and so very active, right? But as soon as she got married, and as a young kid when I was growing up, I saw my father going to play with his friends a cricket match on a Sunday, or something like that.
Yeah.
But I would never see that happening with my mother. She just lost that. She just lost that opportunity. Just somehow it just was taken for granted that she will not play. Why should she be playing? And that's what happens to most of women in the country as well. Somehow that's not something that's seen culturally happening all over our grounds, all over our playing areas. And even if you go for, in these posh clubs, for example, in Pune and Bangalore or wherever, you will see this, that there are always the men. There are hardly any women. So these are some of the things that you see, now that I'm kind of working in women's sport, I see all of this a lot. So yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting, Aditi. In fact, I was talking to my husband, who's a physiotherapist, and he tells me a lot of times when he insists women to do some structured exercise, right, to kind of get relief from backaches or anything that's been a concern, the quick response that he hears is, "But I'm doing all the household work at home." In their heads, it's that I'm doing physical activity which is strenuous. So, I'm drying up clothes, or I'm sweeping and mopping, or I'm just doing the chores at home, which essentially is my time for physical activity. That's how the pattern is built, right? The mindset that we have in especially Indian context. So you don't have a dedicated sports time of sorts for fitness.
Yeah. And you also asked me about what some of the states are doing, and is there any difference that you see? And it's, I mean, one example that immediately comes to mind, and luckily, because with the report that we've recently written, Manipur was one of the states that we did research in, and wahan pe, Sowmya, I mean, the culture is just so cool. I mean, when I went there for my field study, I think they were celebrating Holi there, and Holi is apparently celebrated there not with colors and water like we do it here, but just basically it's a 5-day holiday to the whole state, and everybody is on the field playing. That's how they celebrate Holi there, and I'm telling you, the grounds are just filled, like it's like a World Cup kind of energy on the streets. And it's not just the guys who are there, it's also the women, they're the mothers. And I actually saw so many activities in which there were all these mothers and older women in terms of in their 40s or something like that, actually participating in their whole saris and wearing a matka on their head, and they had this matka race going on in Manipur, and 5-kilometer walk. I mean, it was just
fun.
So much fun, and I'll share a picture with you later on, but it was just fantastic to kind of see that. And I think it again comes from the history also a little bit, and like, for example, when I spoke to one of the athletes in Manipur, and I asked her that, how do you look at, women's sport in your state, kya dekha hai, and all of that. And she's like, ma'am, from the beginning only हमें ऐसी कहानियां बताई गई हैं कि हमारी, like for example, मेरी जो grandmother, she was always with a sword, and she fought the freedom movement herself. She was always on the street. I've never heard stories of my grandmother sitting and cooking, and that's not the stories that we hear. We always hear about our women kind of being on the field, fighting the enemy and all of that, and because I think they are a matriarch kind of a society as well there, it changes, culturally they are just it's not about just doing your home duties. It's about, doing whatever the men are doing and kind of an equal partner in everything. So even sport apparently is the space where there are as many women that you see in Manipur. And this is recreational, of course. I mean, I'm just talking about recreational sport, but that's what it is. So I think, it's something related to maybe the culture, the history that the state has, the kind of, stories that we have told our young girls, and, how they replicate. And for example, for the girl, it was just very simple she said that, मेरे को तो बहुत normal था कि मेरी मम्मी बस साड़ी उसका काम हो जाता था शाम में, and she would pick up a football and go and play with the guys. I mean, it was very normal for me to see that. So I was always competing with my mother. So, I mean, and it was just fantastic. I never heard stories like that in any of the other states that I've been a part of, or I've gone to.
That's incredibly cool.
Yeah, just fantastic. And Manipur is one just fantastic state for sports. I think it's the sport capital of the country for me.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the kind of laurels we have heard, or rather gone through them, is a testimony for it, right? Okay,
Yes.
now let's kind of move into, the zone of thinking about it, the role of the Samaj Sarkar Bazaar in this whole ecosystem, Aditi.
Yes.
So for me, after Rohini's book, right, was out, Rohini Nilekani's book, I've started looking at a lot of things in this lens, saying, okay, what is the role of the society itself? So there are a lot of systemic hurdles we have, which you also share in the report, right, of Simply Sport, where there are systemic hurdles. So if you could kind of help us break it down in terms of what is the role of the society and what are the hurdles we have there. And of course, the government needs to step in for a few things. So, where does that come in? And of course, the markets itself. Basically, what role does the corporate or an organization have towards these things? So if you could kind of, give us some insights there.
Sure. So I think in terms of the society and the Samaj, what are some of the things that we figured out through the report was that, access, I mean, the whole problem is of access, of, not having the right kind of infrastructure, not having safe transport, not having access to the right equipment, not having, a very, clear pathway also. I mean, the parents are generally lost as to how do you even have a sports career in the country. And especially the athletes that we spoke to in the research came from rural background. So we really got that kind of a perspective. And so I think it's a problem of access for sure, but it's also a problem of the socio-cultural barriers, right? I mean, the way sports is looked at is still a little bit in terms of, there are two perspectives to it. One is that they've either looked at from the point of view of, why should a girl play? I mean, why should she get into sport? Because there is no clear pathway. The parents don't know how to start even with it. And the schools, for example, are not really a space where the girls are really getting to play as much or in an organized way. So there is no scope for even thinking about sport as a career or sport as something that a girl can get into. And also the whole aspect of periods, I mean, the menstruation part is also there. I mean, and a lot of parents actually stop their girls from playing sport once they actually hit hit puberty, that it will spoil, maybe it will kind of hamper their childbearing. And, these are some of the things that you keep hearing from a lot of girls also and from a lot of parents. And also, the whole idea of how will a girl look, because in India, I think everywhere it's about shaadi karni hai, to ladki jaisi dikhni chahiye, and sport can actually change that. It can make a girl look more muscular, or she might, just change the way she looks. And these are some of the concerns that a lot of parents and even athletes have, and when they're starting out. And slowly, of course, if they are lucky enough to get into the ecosystem, they realize none of it is true. But these are some of the, socio-cultural barriers that do come out in our discussions. Also the fact of clothing, I mean, kya kapde pehne hai? Abhi sport mein you can't wear a frock and play sport. So you need to wear shorts, right? And a lot of girls actually pointed out that, it becomes very difficult to even go from their house to a ground and remove their track pant, because they're just immediately surrounded by boys, and it becomes difficult for them to kind of openly and confidently play and hit a ball. So, all of these things are something, and I think in terms of this, there is a change of mindset that is required, and more awareness, with what sports can do, because a lot of athletes also look up at sports as an opportunity to break through their poverty and to break through the society that they live in, because sports also guaranteed jobs. I mean, now it's become even lesser. Now, earlier when I used to play, there was more scope to kind of get into a job. But now the whole government job thing is also becoming lesser and lesser for athletes and for people in sport. But at least, most of the governments have the 5% quota.
5%. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
like,
But,
that.
Aditi, I've heard a lot of youngsters telling that they want to stick around to, playing the sport because it also gives them a good segue into getting, going for professional courses, a medical seat and things like that. Does
Right.
that also kind of play out?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, having a sports on playing a sports on your resume in terms of getting good colleges or kind of showing your extracurricular activity. A lot of children actually get into it for some time just to have that certificate that they've played at the district level, and that can kind of become a part of their resumes or whatever when they're applying for higher education. So yes, that is also something that a lot of, at least in the city athletes, use that as a space to kind of push for their higher education. But also, I mean, all this, even for example, there is always a sports quota in colleges, right? We have sports quota in colleges. We have extra grace marks for athletes who have played at a certain level. All of that is also encouraged in our schools and in our ecosystem. But again, the problem is that parents are not aware, especially in the rural parts of the country. There is absolutely no awareness about all these things that you can get, there is a quota, that you can get a seat because if you've played, or you can get extra marks because you've played. So, these are some of the things that are out there, but it's just not, visible enough, or, parents just don't know about it, right? Okay. So yeah, so these are some of the things that you see at a more kind of a society kind of level. Also, our whole idea of in cities, for example, we don't have open spaces. I mean, that's not that's not a priority for most of our cities, right? And when you don't have open spaces, and if you have an open space, access again to that open space is an issue, because public transport is not the greatest everywhere. It's not the safest everywhere, and that is, I mean, that is one of the things that came out, that a lot of athletes said that हमारे पास we have lot of क्या बोलते हैं, हमारे पास ओपन स्पेसेस हैं, बट 5 बजे सुबह अगर ट्रेनिंग होता है तो हमारे पास गाड़ी नहीं होती जाने के लिए वहां पे, एंड माई पेरेंट कांट टेक मी देयर बिकॉज ही इज अ डेली वेज लेबरर, सो I don't have a way to go there because they are scared that something will happen. That is, the safe public transport problem is also there. So I think, these are some of the things that you see. And then at the government level, I just feel that, there are decent amount of schemes. Like, for example, Sports Authority of India is doing a really great job. And I mean, right now there's a lot of good narrative around sports. There's a lot of push for sports, there's a lot of visibility for athletes and all of that, right? But I just feel that, the last mile delivery is an issue. You create most of the stadiums or most of the infrastructure that is available in key cities or key states, that doesn't propel down into our rural spaces. Or there's no structure really in a lot of our rural spaces at all, in terms of how can we get infrastructure access to people who are basically coming from rural part of the country. And interestingly so, that for example, the top scheme, for example, which is the Sai runs, which is for our top athletes in the country, and it gives them financial support and all of that. Even in that, if you see, a study has been done, and what they have said is that almost 72% of those athletes actually come from rural parts of the country. So, and that's a kind of a fascinating insight. So I am sure that rural India wants to play, and that's where most of our champions are actually also coming from. But I think what's happening is that, especially when it comes to girls, I don't think all these schemes have reached them. They don't know about it. Most of them who we spoke to and who was part of a Sai scheme, they told us that they were lucky enough to have like a physical education teacher who was informed enough to tell them that एक trial हो रही है और आपको जाना चाहिए, or they had somebody in the family who had done this before. So the whole role model idea actually helps girls a lot, because if you have somebody who has done this, the family feels that it's safe, that they have done it, so maybe this girl can just replicate it. That also helps a lot. So I think in terms of the schemes reaching these people, that reaching the rural parts of the country, that is a problem, and that if that can become better, we can actually maybe get more people from these places playing, more girls playing especially. And one of the other things, and which is very, I mean, I don't know. I mean, for me, it is very important, and what we realize also is this sanitation. A lot of our stadiums, even in cities and all of that, are just so disgusting. I mean, that's the word that I have to use, because I have been part of these stadiums and I've trained there. And you see that, that actually is a hindrance for a lot of girls, because what happens is if they, for example, are on their periods, they just don't come because they don't have a toilet to go to. And also the whole idea of, just developing an UTI is much more for a girl, right? And you are going to hamper their performance if you don't have a clean toilet or you don't have access to toilet. And it is one of the most underrated kind of hindrance that is spoken about in sport. But for girls, it's a very, very important aspect of performance, of access, of being able to play freely, of, feeling safe. I mean, even the lighting in these toilets, for example, during the evenings. I mean, all these things are small, but they may seem small, but in terms of, just being able to do your job well, these are very, very important things, And for boys, it doesn't matter generally, because if you look at a young boy, they are okay with the toilet problem because they are not very concerned about just going anywhere, But the girls are just very hesitant because of that, change kahan karenge, change karne ke liye jagah nahi hai, all of that. And these are hurdles for them,
Yeah.
So these are some of the things, that also kind of, just awareness about schemes, being able to reach the right people, sanitation, these are some of the things that also I think another important thing is the sports science part. In India, we are just very nascent in terms of developing our own kind of a sports science, a curriculum or the education space, right? We are just about starting, and we have a long way to go in that as well, because that is a lacking thing for a lot of our athletes, because we generally depend on, when it comes to elite athletes or the top athletes, you will see they generally are either in foreign hands, or they are basically relying upon foreign coaches and all of that, right? So we need to build up on that really well. We are looking at ourselves becoming a really successful nation in sports education, sports science. All of this is also something that we need to start investing and thinking about. And that might again help. These are some of the things I think at the government level. Also, lastly, at the government space, I feel the physical education bit, I think that is just not in place. That is one of the least prioritized subjects in the country. Yes, we have these things that it's mandatory and it's compulsory for all schools, and you need to have an hour and all of that. But is it really happening on the ground? That is the real question. And also, in what way is it happening? Are we really able to have a curriculum around it? Is it grade specific? Are we able to kind of get both the genders equally on the ground playing? I think physical education is one of the critical ways of getting more and more girls to play, because that school becomes a safe space, right? The whole safety aspect is completely gone when a girl is in the school, because parents also think she's safe there. And if we are not exploiting that and that 1 hour that she's going to get to play and letting her play there, we are actually cutting down her access to zero for a lot of girls, right? Because school is the only space where they might get to play. So I think these are the
Aditi, I wanted to just think through this a little more. Like, I know that a lot of parents who have young children and they're making their decision about which school. At least for me, it was like, I need to see a playground, for me to be convinced that this is the place that my child will go. But I've seen a lot of, urban schools at least have decided that to fulfill this requirement, they have indoor courts because it's on one floor. They've managed to clear up that particular space instead of having a ground to play. And similarly, this mindset of thinking that, a child who does good in academics has to be pushed for sports, because even if they step out for a week or so for a tournament, they'll come back and catch up, but not really looking at it from a lens that, here's a good potential player who's like really good at a particular sport, and then identify that talent and nurture, right? Because I think even now people will rather focus on getting academics right, and a lot of times it's on the presumption that sports can tire the child, and they might not be able to, because of fatigue, perform in other things. So what do you think about it?
No, I think, see, the sports and academic battle has always been there. It's still there, and it was there when I was playing as well. The first thing is about sports and academics is that you can do both. I did both, throughout, and all this fatigue and everything that we're talking about. I think I was able to focus much better because I was playing my sport. Like, for example, if a kid who was not into sports was maybe studying for 3 hours a day, I would get that 1 hour to study and I would still perform decently well, because I knew I just had that 1 hour and I just had the concentration skill to kind of, do what I wanted to do in that 1 hour. So I really don't think that both of them cannot go together, and both of them can be done well. Yes, there will come a point in time where you'll have to make a decision कि आपको कौन से stream में जाना है. Like for example, when you finish off your 10th, for example, or your 12th, you will have to make a decision that do you want to go the academic route or do you want to go the sport route. And yes, there I think a lot of athletes have to kind of make that choice. So for example, do you go science or an engineering stream, or do you pick up BCom or arts, so that the pressure is a little less and you can kind of play and also get your academics done. So yes, those choices have to be made, but I feel that you don't have to choose and you shouldn't be made to choose, because what tends to happen, and now is happening a lot in sport, is that you get all these kind of parents saying, can he just leave sport? Can he just leave academics? He's doing so well and he's a national level athlete now. And padhai ki kya zarurat hai? Let him just focus on sports. I really think that that's a wrong approach, because what you're doing with your child is that, first of all, you don't need to play 24 hours. You just need to play 6 hours to 7 hours a day to perform the way you want to do. Even Rafael Nadal doesn't play for 24 hours. So what are you going to do the rest of the hours? You can definitely push to play, to study, for example. But a lot of these things happen that padhai ki zarurat nahi hai. But what the parents don't realize is that sport is a very unpredictable kind of profession. You can get injured any a day, you can lose a year, and you never know if you'll be able to come back. And also, we don't have a structure in the country for what happens after sport. Right. So, for example, in France, for most of the athletes, they have sport universities, and I've been in one, and I've seen they're just so incredible. They have all their education kind of structured according to their sport, according to their tournaments calendar, and all of that, so that they don't miss out on education when they are playing, or even America for that matter. Right. Everything is school and college sport there, and it's so big, and everybody finishes their education with their sport, and they're supposed to get a decent amount of grade marks to even be in any of these teams in the US, right? And why can't, and that's how it needs to be even in the country. But in the country, we are being to make that choice that you either do this or that. That's because we don't have a structure in place. And that's why I keep telling parents that, both can be done and both should be done. Because if you, tomorrow, if there is an injury and you can't play, what are you going to do? And also the kind of jobs that we were speaking about that are available for athletes, they're only available for the cream of the athletes. Only 5% of the athletes, top athletes, have the security of a job. Rest of them, the 95% of them actually don't have anything to kind of hold on to, after they quit, and they're not all going to become Sainas and Sindhus, right? For example, I couldn't just rely on my Commonwealth Games medal because I had a job. Of course, I had a job because I was in the top 2 in the country when I was a junior. But, it is not going to work out. So you need to have that balance, and we need to have a system in the country first for us to, tell parents to choose sport, don't worry. I mean, they will worry, I mean, there is really no system in place to kind of give them the security ki, theek hai, after they quit there is going to be a career for them waiting, And so, so there is a systemic change that needs to happen on how we look at sports and academics. And that's very, very crucial to help athletes and parents to make a knowledgeable choice. But I really feel that you can't push an athlete or anybody to just pick up one thing and go. You need to be able to do both, because till we don't have a system in place, you're going to really be stuck. And I've seen so many athletes, not making it big, and then also not because they don't have the educational background, they just are lost, and that's just very sad to see. So we need a lot of systematic changes in terms of how we look at sports and academics, and especially professional sport and academics, and how can we make both happen.
Nice. So great, Aditi. Now we'll take a quick break, and then we'll come back to this conversation while we talk about the role of corporates and the bigger ecosystem itself.
Sure.
So welcome back. We're going to take this conversation forward to see how much of potential does, corporate CSR or organizations which are interested in ensuring that sports get deserved attention of sorts. So Aditi, if you could probably share some examples of, how this has evolved over time.
Sure. So I think with the corporate CSR initiatives in sport, there has been a change. I mean, from where we started maybe 10 years back to where we are today, there is a decent amount of money that is being pushed in sports. Yes, it's much lesser, of course, if you compare it to education or health and, all of that, because we are a developing country and it's pretty obvious that, you can't be expecting, everybody to kind of put in more and more amount of money into sport when you have to still kind of solve for education, poverty, and just basic necessities. But I just feel that in terms of the sponsorships and the terms of money coming into sport, I still feel that a lot of it is going into two directions. I mean, one is the elite sport direction, where we are pushing in money to get more and more athletes to kind of perform in the Olympics or in the bigger events, right? I mean, the elite sport is one thing that a lot of money, for example, with our foundations like OGQ and Go Sports, who have been doing such a great job in the last decade, and they have been raising a lot of money for our elite athletes, and the corporate is actually ready to do that, because you see something like a medal hanging, right? I mean, that's everybody is hoping for that Olympic medal, and so you have that vision and you want to kind of push for that, and you see a lot of CSR going there. The other part of the CSR that you see going in is using sport for development, right? What that means is that you are using sport as a tool through your schools or through your after school programs, jahan pe aap, you're teaching kids life skills and through sport, or teaching other important concepts like gender or menstruation, and you're using sport as a tool to do that, right? Yeah. So these are two directions where you see that that there is money coming in. Of course, it's not at the level at which I would love it to be, but it's still there. I mean, there is some level of awareness now around that, and there is money coming in. But I think one space jahan pe we are still not seeing enough being done, and that's why Simply Sport actually picked it up also, and we saw it as a gap, is grassroots sports. And what I mean by grassroots sports is, till India has a feeder system to kind of get athletes to kind of get to the elite level, right? I mean, there is a whole pathway to kind of go through before you even qualify to play the nationals, right? So what are we doing at the regional, district, state level? I mean, there is not much money coming there, because maybe the visibility is an issue, that how do you even show? I mean, is being a state champion, for example, important enough for the corporates? I think it should be, because till you don't have a state champion, you don't have a national champion, right? So in the grassroots sport ecosystem, it is pretty difficult to raise money, because the vision that you show them is not an Olympic medal, or the vision that you show them is not learning about social awareness or self-awareness, or you can't sell that in grassroots sport. In grassroots sport, what you can say is, this is the girl that I picked up from Jharkhand, and now she's gone and played for the state, right? And right now that's not important enough. But I think it should get more and more important to kind of start investing in the feeder system, because till we have that, to be able to replicate and to be able to do more and more at the elite level, it's going to get very, very difficult, right? So that is one. The other thing that I see missing is being able to invest more and more in women's sport. We just don't pay attention enough to women's sport. And when I say sport, I just don't mean the athlete ecosystem, but also the coaches, right? Administration, right? I mean, we don't have enough female leaders in the sport ecosystem, and I think the leadership debate is everywhere. But even in the sport, we don't have important decision-making bodies having enough women in their bodies. Similarly, like investing in tournaments, in leagues for women, right? Having more and more opportunities for them to showcase their talent. There's always a struggle to kind of get leagues going on for girls in football or in volleyball, and again, there are a lot of grassroots organizations who are exactly trying to do that, but we don't have enough people backing it up, and we need more and more people kind of working on the women's sport aspect of things. So for example, even if we run a campaign, say, about creating awareness about what are the different schemes out there for women or in sport, and taking them to women and telling the girls in the schools about it, maybe just doing that. We are not investing enough in women's sport and getting more and more women into the ecosystem. So one of the recommendations that we have given, and it comes from Japan, for example, that they actually have a female coaches program. What that means is that you have such a big athlete repository. You take some of the athletes and you start conditioning them to become coaches. So for example, in most of our in the facilities that we went to through our research, we realized that the ratio is generally 1:3. That you have the one is, of course, the female coaches and support staff, and the three is the male coaches and support staff. And what that is doing is you're not making enough role models, right? You're not making enough role models for even a girl athlete to look at and say, yes, I can become a coach too. Look at this woman, right? And so I think, just investing more in women's sports, investing more in female health also, and research, because what is happening is, and it's a very interesting statistic that, and this is more of an international statistic, but in the last decade or so, there was a Washington Post article that spoke about it, that only maybe 3% of the studies done overall in sports performance have used women as their sample, only 3%. So just think about that. So most of our knowledge, or most of the training that we are giving our women all over the world, or even of course mostly also in India, is a generalized thing that we are doing from taking research or whatever from the men's studies, right? Yeah. So that is it's very much in the nascent stage, even internationally. But even in India, we need to start investing in female health, in female athlete performance, and that's what we are also doing with Simply Sport. And luckily, we have Ankit backing it up. I mean, he's the founder of our organization, and he's backing the whole female athlete health thing, because it's just not there. We are just kind of saying, we are all equal, and nothing needs to change. But we are not equal. Our bodies are different, our physiology is different. We need to train differently. So I think. Yeah. So majorly I feel with the CSR thing, it's about investing in women, investing in the right places, right initiatives, getting more women into administration, helping with the leadership training, helping with getting more and more coaches into the ecosystem, female coaches, and then also the whole female health aspect and the grassroots sport. If we don't invest in the feeder system, I don't think we will ever kind of become a China or a US and, all of that. So yeah, I think these are some of the spaces that the corporates can maybe look at and might be helpful.
So true. And with your extension of the grassroots level talent itself, now, if there's no avenue for people to come into tournaments where they'll get picked for bigger the agenda, right? Now at least with cricket, we see that there is in Karnataka, you have the KPL, then you have the IPL, you have Ranji Trophy. There are many layers to it, which helps talent shine. And then, of course, you get an opportunity, right? So rightly said. So Aditi, you've been also working a lot on the menstrual awareness workshops that you do, and whenever we have spoken, you've told me, hey, I'm traveling to Bangalore to coach kids around it, right? So do you think it's moving in a direction where people have started being aware of it and have accepted that, yes, there is a difference in how you kind of operate, and even the female athlete triad, right? If you can kind of elaborate a little on that.
Sure. So with menstruation, we started working with it, I think around a year back or so. And we call the initiative Simply Periods. And because again, this initiative was launched after we started doing this research, the Breaking Barriers report, when we started doing the research for that, one of the key things that we were trying to basically look at was menstrual health and awareness. And we've got some of the best, not the best in that terms, but, some of the most revealing kind of insights from that study on menstrual health. And we realized that, just nobody is talking about it. Nobody knows anything about it. Nor does the athlete know anything about it, nor does the coach know anything about it. And also just the science behind it, or how does it impact performance? Does it impact performance? Also the ability to just speak about it with your coach, because they're generally surrounded by male coaches, there is discomfort about talking about it. Also the whole idea of, should you train when you're on your period? Should you not train? Should you take a tablet for pain? Can you take a tablet for pain? There are so many of these questions that, both athletes and coaches didn't have answers to. And also this whole idea of, how do you train a male athlete versus a female athlete, right? And there should be a difference in that, because like I've already said, we are different. But I think almost more than 80% of the coaches said that, there is no differentiation that they make when they train their male or female athletes. They do the same training plans. Maybe there's a difference in the reps that they do or the weight that they lift, but otherwise everything remains the same. So when we heard all of this, we realized that maybe this is one space, the whole female athlete health and training space is something that has been just not explored at all in the country. And we also saw that internationally, a lot of more awareness was being generated at that time about, female athlete training, female athlete uniforms, for example. Like, for example, you have the Wimbledon, the controversy, if you know about it, that, a lot of women athletes athletes came up and said, stop telling us to wear white clothes. What do we do when we are on our period? We are constantly scared about, staining our uniform or, whatever, our clothes and all of that.
Yeah.
So we suddenly saw, all of this happening. And luckily, that's when we also, kind of got in touch with, for our first version of the workshop, we got in touch with Project Bala. And we just did a very small introductory curriculum on what is just talking about what is menstruation, what is the triad, and all of that. And I remember in the initial days of the initiative, it was, of course, us who was pushing very, very hard for people to kind of, just listen to us, to kind of, tell them that why this is important to understand, and all of that. There was so much. We would maybe reach out to them 10 times, or we would reach out to say 50 people to get a one yes, right? And it started like that. But I have seen that over a span of 1 year, not just us, but even the media has picked up menstruation quite a bit. You had a Julian Goswami talking about how we need more research into it. We had a very interesting story about a badminton player called Anushka Parekh, who was a badminton player, and she spoke about how PCOD, PCOS, and her symptoms with that, kind of affected her training, her performance. And we also had, for example, Fogart, one of the Fogart sisters, also talking about how she won a medal, but she was on her period, and how that impacted her, her training or the way she was planning. So you had all this media and everybody suddenly picking it up, and luckily we also kind of were doing these workshops at that time, and we realized that we couldn't just do the introductory workshops. We need a sports science angle to it, and now we have like a proper 2-day workshop which talks about everything sports science and helps athletes and coaches understand about how they can actually plan their training around the phases of the cycle and all of that. And that has got a great response. One of the key things that we achieved this year, I think, was being able to become a part of the NIS curriculum in Sports Authority of India. So basically, they have the sports coaching diploma course that happens in various, I think, 4 centers across SAI, and Bangalore is one of the centers. And I think menstruation was our workshop. The menstruation workshop was the first time ever that a sports coaching certification program actually had it as a compulsory workshop to be done for their coaches. So it was the first time ever in the history of NIS, right? So you kind of, you see these things happening, and you see that, there is a change coming through, and more and more academies and everybody is actually doing these workshops now in pockets, and, all of that has started. And and so I think we are seeing that change happening, and with the initiative, of course, we have a lot of plans on how we want to kind of, make this narrative more and more out there, that how do you train a female athlete? What are the different things that you need to know about, and all of that. So we are trying to create that more and more, and also keep doing our workshops. But I feel that, the very important thing to realize about menstruation and its connection with sport, and, just the whole idea of it, is that we can't just blame the coaches. One of the things that I went with when I started doing these workshops is that, these coaches just lack empathy, and they don't even want to know about periods, and, there's just no seriousness and nothing around it. And I kind of went with that bias. But as I started doing these workshops more and more, I just realized that, it's not their fault. In their families, or even in my family, for example, and we are 2 sisters, and we are 3:1, right? We are my mother, we are 2 sisters, and there's my father. We never actually have had a discussion on periods ever. Right? There's never has been a discussion around it. Maybe just a discussion would be ki pads khatam ho gaye, leke aao. Yeah, my stomach is hurting a little bit today, I'm going to not cook. That is the amount of discussion we've had around periods in our house itself. So how can you expect a rural coach to kind of, have this big thing about acha periods, I know everything about it? It's not going to happen. He's never spoken about it. That has never been spoken about it in his family. And even the athletes, for example, they have never spoken about it in their families, or, this has never been a point of discussion. So I felt that, the more and more I've done these workshops, I've realized that the coaches are actually wanting to help. They really want to help, but they just don't know where to start. How do you even have this conversation with your girl athlete? How do you even help her? What are the tools that are available out there? They just don't know. And once you tell them that, these are the things that an athlete goes through, and, our workshop basically has a lot of discussion points and all of that. And once you hear the athlete experiences around it, and they actually, by the end of the workshop, they develop empathy around it, right? They actually realize that, acha, aisa hota hai kya? That's how they kind of react after the workshop, and they develop some empathy, some kind of awareness around it. So it's not something that you can just blame upon one or the other. It's just about the fact that it's just not spoken about enough. And the more we start speaking about it, the more we kind of put the science part behind it as much as possible, more people are going to, of course, say yes to it. There's nothing to kind of deny or say no to, because nothing is known about it. So I think it's positively changing, but I think this is one space that is definitely going to pick up, Sowmya, because with the BCCI also doing so many things in the women's cricket bit, and just overall, I think there's a push now for women leagues, and you see this slowly changing, right? And I think the women health space and athlete performance or female athlete performance, all these things are going to surely catch up. And it's good that we are kind of, we're already in that in that domain and doing some work there. So we might have some advantage, but I think it's really something that is upcoming and need more investment. And again, I say this, that with the CSR thing also, that, you need to research all these female health things scientifically as much as possible. We don't have enough research right now to prove one thing or the other. So we definitely need more space or more funding for women health research and to understand how these phenomena work and how they affect female performance. We have not been able to do that yet.
Yeah. Oh, wow, Aditi, but I think, there's enough disruption happening on all fronts, right? And I'm glad you told, like, at least a toolkit of sorts, some template that people could adopt, to have such conversations, give them enough resources to make it easy, right? To also break those barriers. And I'm glad you're already on it. And I think for us, it's not just about having such podcasts and talking about it, but getting women really on the tracks, right? Literally get them to be in serious sports that they're passionate about. So on that note, it's very reassuring to see that there's good scope to develop this, in a way that it's optimized, because a lot of talent is not yet out there, and we know that women can do a lot better. So thanks a lot, Aditi, for being on this ATP podcast. It's very reassuring, at least for the women in sports, right? For the women who are in the lineup to get there soon. So thanks for being with us. Yeah. And on the New Year note, I think it's also important for a lot more people to look at it from a policy lens, right? So we have a 48 weeks PGP course starting sometime in Jan, and applications are open, but we have an annual intake for this. So in case anybody who's listening to this is interested, do check out our website, that is takshashila.org.in. And this is one good place for you to challenge the status quo and also look at, deeper thinking patterns and equip yourself with more frameworks and tools to help you understand the policy ecosystem better. So thanks, Aditi, once again. It was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Sowmya. Thank you for this opportunity. And so just for everybody listening, a few things that, please do check out our website, simplysport.in. And we also, we have just been discussing about the report. We've just launched our report called Breaking Barriers for Women in Sport. It's at 4 states and in the country. And we basically look at the whole ecosystem, not just the athlete, but also the coaches and the administrator ecosystem, and seeing how we can kind of get more and more women in the sport ecosystem in general and not just as athletes. So do check out our report and do reach out to me through Sowmya or, whatever. And if there is anything that you see that we could do together, you have questions about, I would love to kind of engage. So do check us out, and I look forward to seeing you, Sowmya, soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Aditi. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.